So,
Hey,
hi.
hey everyone, Derek Weeks here, live again. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, we're live on air. So Mark is saying you can't hear me, but we're live on air. Okay. All right. So thanks, Mark. We're running a couple different rooms here. So thank you everyone for joining us. We have on the line Daniel Sauble and Shade Salone from our Nexus Repository Manager team, or really not the Nexus Repository Manager team, the user experience team that works with all of our products, including Nexus Repository. They are going to talk about how they've been working with the community to make the product more helpful from a user experience standpoint. So without further ado, I'm going to kick it over to Daniel and let him and Shade run this session. Thanks.
Thanks, Derek. So, my name is Daniel Sauble. I'm a product owner here at Sonatype, and with me is Shade Salone, a UX researcher here, also at Sonatype. And today we're going to talk a little bit about how the team is making Nexus Repository Manager more helpful. Both of us are based out of the Pacific Northwest. I live in Portland, Oregon, and Shade is a little bit to the north in Seattle, Washington. So to kind of kick this off, I wanted to talk a little bit about in Sonatype's product line, and that ends up being the welcome page in Nexus Repository Manager. At the moment, it gets about 400,000 active monthly users, which is a lot, and about 25,000 clicks on the content in that page per month. And so it's really an ideal place to kind of focus first on improving the experience and making it more helpful. So for those of you who have been using Nexus Repo for a while, this page might look familiar to you. This is how the welcome page looked as of January 2017. And about around that time, I took ownership of this page and was kind of looking at kind of how we can improve it. So if you look at the page, you can see that there's a kind of a small section for Nexus Repo resources midway down the page. But overall, I felt that we were underutilizing the space that was available, and that we could do better. So over the next year and a half, we made between 40 and 50 small tweaks and improvements to the page. And today, the page looks very much better. It looks like this, in fact. I think today, kind of using this as a starting point, I'd like to talk about kind of what the top improvements we made that resulted in this page being more helpful, and then kind of segue into a kind of a conversation discussion around the feedback we've gotten and how we've applied that to this page, but also the broader Nexus Repo experience. So what improvements did we make? As I said, we spent about a year and a half making improvements to that page, slowly, iteratively over time. So I'm just going to talk about the top 4, but keep in mind that there were kind of a lot of experiments that went into making the experience what it is today. So the first improvement I'd like to talk about is update notifications. So this is pretty simple, but it actually was a remarkably a good improvement. So the problem that we were trying to solve is that essentially software is best when it's kept up to date. And one thing that we wanted to do was to let you know within the product when a new update came available. And so this little banner here shows you a few things. It shows you what the new version is, gives you some highlights of that new version, and kind of helps you be informed as to whether or not upgrading makes sense for you. And then it also tells you how old your current version of Nexus Repo is, because that's also some information that might incentivize you to upgrade or to choose not to upgrade. And if you want, you can dig into the release notes and then actually click through to our download site where you can download the binaries. And we've seen a lot of people using this new feature and essentially keeping their software up to date simply by being aware that new releases are available. So that's a pretty awesome way that we've helped use this space to make the whole experience a little bit more helpful. The second improvement I wanted to talk about is dismissible content, which sounds a little bit obscure, but it's really quite simple. So the problem that we were trying to solve is there was lots of helpful things we knew we could add to this page, but not all of those improvements make sense in perpetuity. So there are some things, and updates are a great example, where you might see that there's an update available, and once you've made a decision for yourself as to whether or not you plan to take action, if you've decided not to upgrade, you probably don't want that banner hanging around. So the dismiss functionality just puts a little box X on the page that lets you choose to hide various bits of content on the page. And the side benefit of this is that it helps bring kind of to the fore the other content on the page that you do find valuable, so it doesn't get buried in a sea of irrelevancy. So that's the second improvement that we've made to the outreach page. The third improvement is easy access to documentation. But again, this is fairly straightforward and seemed obvious in retrospect, but it's something that we hadn't actually put in place for quite some time. So you might remember in that original welcome page that I showed you, there was that little resources section with a link to docs and the Nexus feedback email and things like that. But it was pretty generic, and it wasn't really doing a great job of surfacing things that someone who's on the welcome page, especially a new user, might find helpful when so we created this Get Started section here on the left, and it's actually mildly intelligent. It can actually tell when you're not on the latest, and if you're not, then it will say, maybe you'd like some docs related to installing or related to upgrading. And then once you do upgrade to the latest version, then those links go away, so they don't clutter your space when they're probably not all that helpful. And looking further down the Get Started section, you can see a link for configuration. And that link takes you to a page in the docs with kind of a walkthrough of our UI and helps explain what the different sections do and how to configure them properly. And so that's been a very popular link as well. And then going further down that section, you can see the repository formats listed there below. And this has been also pretty wildly popular, and it serves a couple of purposes. The first purpose is that it kind of gives you an overview of all the formats that we support in our ecosystem. For a long time, Nexus Repo was kind of Maven-centric, and with Nexus Repo 3, we're trying to move more to a polyglot view of the universe. And so this kind of helps highlight the fact that a lot of work has been done in other ecosystems to make them first-class citizens of Nexus Repo. So on the left, you can see a list of formats that come pre-installed with Nexus Repo, and whenever you upgrade, you're going to get the latest, the full list of that column. And on the right, you can see a list of formats that are created and supported by our community, and that list is growing rapidly. But the purpose of keeping it here is so that you can easily link off to the Sonatype exchange and get those documentation and plugins for use in your Nexus Repo. And then below, we have a basic link to the doc site as existed before, in case that something you need isn't on this page and you just want to search for it really quickly. So the last improvement I wanted to talk about is surveys and polls. And this will kind of segue into Shade's part of the presentation. So you'll notice on the welcome page that we have this big box on the lower right. And this is where surveys and polls appear on a regular basis. And the problem that we were trying to solve here is we have a roadmap and we have things we know need to get done. But before we go off and build them, we want to make sure we're getting feedback from the community so that we're building them in the right way. So what this space allows us to do is get immediate feedback to let you know when we have something coming down the pike, and then to get your thoughts and comments, which directly inform what that feature turns out to be. So to talk a little bit about kind of how we consume the feedback that we get through this and other channels, and then also how the research program at Sonatype works, generally speaking, turn it over to Shade, and Shade can talk through kind of some of that side of what we do.
Thanks, Daniel. So to tell you a bit more about the channels that we've created to connect Nexus repository users and the product teams, I can tell you a bit about our UX research program. So in our UX research program, we have 4 main pillars that act as channels for engaging with our users. The first one there on the left is about how we want to learn more about customers and their problems to ensure that we're staying up to date in understanding customer needs and behaviors. And this is something that happens on an ongoing basis through our polls, through our surveys, and customer interviews. And the second pillar is concept testing. So that's testing of new feature ideas. So whenever we have new ideas that we think will provide value to our customers, we schedule sessions to talk to customers and talk to our users to make sure we're understanding what they think will provide value to them and to be able to prioritize their needs. The third section is product testing. So that's more feature testing, looking at, is this feature easy to use? Are customers satisfied with it? Is it useful? So that's classic usability testing. We also do customer interviews. And then the final pillar is measurement. So that's summative testing of existing products to determine how customers are using features today. So those are the features that are already released. And we just continuously check in with users in interviews and usability testing to ensure we're meeting any developing needs as we move forward with product development. So then just to ensure that we're continuously reaching out to users to get their feedback at every stage of the design and development process, we provide multiple opportunities for engagement. So on the welcome page, you'll see us post those polls, also longer surveys. We'll post requests for users to join product team calls and usability tests as well. And on the next slide, we can take a look more specifically at polls and surveys. So most of the time, you'll find that we have a poll posted on Nexus Repository Manager welcome page. The questions that we choose are either related to a specific feature or they're a general call for feedback regarding improvements. And polls are typically really short, 1 to 2 questions, because our goal is to provide a channel for users to give input in just taking a few seconds of their time. But once a feature is on the roadmap and we have a timeline for design and development, we move into capturing more detailed user feedback. So we'll post longer surveys on the welcome page. We'll post requests for users to talk to us in usability tests and concept tests, like I noted. And for surveys and calls, we're asking for a more significant investment in users' time. So we often provide a gift card gratuity as a thank you for joining the session as well. But as an example for how polls and surveys and user testing connect together and through the welcome page, our most recent feature poll was on retention policies and cleanup. So the Nexus Repository Manager team wants to make it easier to remove unnecessary components so that users can reclaim storage space. So we asked our users to tell us more about their needs for retention policies to help inform our upcoming work. So you might have seen we posted a poll asking users if automatically removing components is a concern for them and to describe the state of their current and expected storage capacity. And after we collected that feedback, we also posted a follow-up longer survey asking users what content removal approaches are valuable to them and how easy or difficult it is to standardize retention and removal policies. And so from that survey, then we also just put out a call asking if users would want to talk to us in more detail about their needs. And we're currently in that process of talking to people who signed up in 30-minute product team calls where users can talk directly to our product owners and product team to talk more about their needs and to also learn about our future ideas for retention policies and cleanup. On the next slide, in addition to featuring to feature-related polls, we also ask questions occasionally just about general improvements, customer satisfaction. We post an NPS, a Net Promoter Score, to get feedback. So on the left here, it shows our Net Promoter Score process. So what we do is we conduct a content analysis of the open-ended feedback that we get from the NPS, and we track the comments based on whether they're positive or negative and whether they come from promoters, passives, or detractors. So to calculate the net promoter score, we ask how likely are you to recommend us to a friend or colleague? And promoters are those who rate the question a 9 or 10. Passives give it a rating of 7 or 8, and detractors a rating of 0 to 6. So the unique approach we take in UX is then to bucket those open-ended comments attached to the score by feature area. So we ask also, why did you give us this score? And then we look at whether the comment was positive or negative, like I said, whether it came from a promoter, passive, or detractor. And then we track if the comments in a certain feature area are trending more negative or more positive, and you can see that on the right. So each bar represents a feature area, and at the top you could see that's Q3 from 2017 and then Q4 from 2017 as an example. So we take those comments every quarter to see if we're improving. So for instance, last year we had a lot of comments asking for UI upload in Nexus Repository Manager 3. Which created a negative trend in comments. And then when we released upload in the UI, those comments began trending in a positive direction. And so on the next slide, just to show you the process of how we listen to customers throughout the development process, I brought 2 examples. On the left, you can see UI upload. So for UI upload, we started tracking feedback in the NPS. So we weren't prompting people and asking them about UI upload, but it's just something that emerged in the content analysis. So from that, we created a specific poll asking for feedback directly on UI upload. And so then after that, we took the trends from that feedback and brought it to the product team. And we looked at some of the reasons why people were requesting UI upload, some of the implementations, details they were requesting. So people talked a lot about the convenience of being able to upload third-party components to a hosted repository directly from the UI. That they were missing that in 3.x. They talked about the efficiency compared to using the command line and requested support for additional formats beyond Maven, so raw, NPM, PyPy, NuGet, Ruby gems. So from there, we followed up with users and conducted interviews and then usability tests once we had mock-ups and designs for the new UI upload experience, and we had several rounds of iterations there, checking in with our users. And for UI upload, we're currently still collecting feedback in usability tests of the UI today to hone future improvements. So after it's released, we continue to listen, and we'll continue to track any comments that pop up in our improvement polls or our NPS as well. And then on the right, you can see tree browsing. So the tree browsing research started with a targeted poll asking users for feedback on their current use of browse and search. We also asked for any general improvements they would like to see made, and then we dove in with interviews on individual users' specific needs. So the feedback in the original poll and then survey, people talked a lot about the efficiency of tree browsing, how it improved their effectiveness and the needs they'd have for ease of navigation. So we conducted interviews, and like with UI upload, a couple of rounds of usability testing with mock-ups and interactive prototypes. And then afterwards, we followed up with a poll targeted to the tree browsing experience, asking for users' input on their continued experience, if there's anything else they would like to see develop or improved upon. And we've taken action on some of that feedback. We're responding to bug reports and continuing to work on the tree browse representation for different formats like Docker. So if you'd like to participate in a UX session, you can also contact us directly. So you can sign up to join customer calls. Today, we're looking for people to talk about search, retention policies and cleanup, and content replication. And then you can always just look for our current poll on the welcome page, but I'll drop a direct UX sign-up form in the general Slack channel. And you can sign up to be contacted for sessions on specific topics or anything in general. But I'll hand the mic back over to Daniel here for some final thoughts on making Nexus Repository Manager more helpful.
Thanks, Shade. So, like Shade mentioned, really for us, trying to be more of a culture of experimentation, it's not just about getting feedback to actually make the improvements themselves, but it's about monitoring, after improvement had been released to see if it actually had the intended effect, and then to iterate as needed until you get it right. So there are a few reasons why we think that the improvements that we've been making to the welcome page, but also to other parts of Nexus repo are working. The first reason is that people like you have told us so, and we hear from Twitter, we hear through Jira, we hear via the polls and the surveys, and generally what we hear is that the improvements that we make are what people need to get their jobs done, and so that feels really good. But secondly, and Shade touched on this as well, we look at our NPS score over time, and every quarter when we send out that survey, we kind of see how we're doing, and the score is trending up and to the right. So it indicates that, again, that the improvements that we're making to Nexus repo are resulting in a more helpful experience. And finally, specifically to the welcome page, but since we started making improvements to that page a year and a half ago, we've seen 700% more engagement, which is huge. And again, I think that validates that the improvements and tweaks that we've made haven't just been done blindly, but have actually resulted in a page that people find valuable and want to use. So again, feel free to drop your questions into the Slack channel, and we'll be happy to answer them here if there are any questions right now, or we can answer them afterwards and follow up. But basically, if there are any improvements we've made, we'd love to hear what you think about them. So feel free to drop that into the channel. And also, if you have any questions about the way we do research at Sonatype, I'm sure Shade would love to field some of those questions as well. And feel free to ask questions about anything that we covered in this presentation, and we'll be happy to take that. Is there anything in the Slack channel, Shade?
Yeah, I haven't been tracking it, so I can't answer that for you at the moment, but I'm sure there have been questions or comments in the Slack channel all day as I look over to my other computer where it is. So Daniel and Shade, so the one thing, I think it's great that you guys did this session because one, it brings attention to a screen that a lot of people might say, I just need to get my work done, and I don't want the advertising or the whatever the company is saying, but really putting a face to a project and an initiative that we have at Sonatype to say we do care. We actually do want you to click on those links and take those surveys or participate in these groups. So I think that's an important part of how we improve our products and what gets on the roadmap for improvement, and that it really is user driven through these initiatives that you and your team are doing. When it goes beyond Nexus repository that you focused on for this session, can people take the same initiatives for Nexus Lifecycle or Nexus Firewall in terms of feedback to the user experience team? Yes, please do. So excellent. So if there's any folks out there listening in that are using our other products in addition to Nexus repository that have feedback on user experience, and you want to get involved with feedback on those products and the user experience there, definitely ping Daniel and Shade in the Slack channel to make sure that they're aware of your interest there. So again, thank you guys for your time. It's really interesting to see all of the different avenues that we use to connect with users and gather feedback. And this is we're just adding one more to the mix with the user conference here in the Slack channel. communications. So I'm super happy to see that, and thanks again.
Thank you.
So right now we're gonna shift over. Let me bring them back into the broadcast. We have Chris Bolton and Jasmine James from Delta Airlines. They are on the line. I believe they are not muted at the moment, so we can test out and make sure that they are. Bring the presentation up here. Chris and Jasmine, can we do a quick sound check with you to make sure that we can?
Hey, Derek.
Hey.
Hey, good morning or good afternoon, I guess. I've been in a room where I can't see outside, so to me it looks like the same time since I started at 7 a.m. this morning or so. So good afternoon. Delta Airlines, are you guys based in Atlanta, down south of us here?
We are. We're
Yep.
Hartsfield Jackson, Atlanta.
Nice, nice. So a busy airport on a daily basis. So a lot of, I think, as with a lot of businesses, you think about Delta Airlines and you think about Atlanta's huge airport, the terminals there, the planes and the people moving back and forth, and you really think of an airline as, hey, they're planes and getting people on board and flying them to different cities. But myself, flying a lot. I know that there's a lot of interaction with me and software and airlines in order to get my tickets, which are fully electronic now, to check the schedule of the planes, to check in, to make reservations. I'm sure to schedule all of your employees and your ticketing systems and all that. So it's a huge operation, not just a small niche part of how an airline works. And as part of that, getting software developed, rolling it out on time, making sure it's extremely reliable, because when it isn't, folks like me can't check in for a flight or get the information that we need to. So I'm really interested in hearing your perspective as you work at Delta, and kind of how the organization works, a little insight into that, and your CI/CD processes there that, of course, as your title says, include Nexus and how you rolled it out into a large organization, but just getting a sense of your journey there. So we are right on time at 4:15 for our start time. So I don't want to delay anymore. We want an on-time departure for the presentation, so let's go.
Well, thank you so much, Derek, and thank you, Sonatype, for having us today to talk about our journey through the process of rolling out Nexus here at Delta Airlines. So just to get started, we just wanted to introduce ourselves to you all. I'm Chris Bolton. I'm a development tools engineer here at Delta Airlines. I also have a background in application development. I have been at Delta since April of 2017, where I came into the company to basically help out with bringing in new tools and technologies into the company. So Sonatype Nexus is one of those products that we brought in for our binary repository. And so just a little background on what I enjoy and what I do. So I enjoy spending time with my family, playing sports and games. And just a fun fact about myself, I've actually ran multiple marathons and a handful of half marathons as well. So Jasmine, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Jasmine James, also development tools engineer on the team working with Chris. My background is primarily in automated testing, working with UI testing, mobile applications, that sort of stuff. I started here at Delta in February of 2017, so just a couple of months before Chris, but we both started in the initial implementation of our tool chain here at Delta. I enjoy traveling, of course, with my family, and completing small home improvement projects that sometimes don't go as planned, but it's still fun nonetheless. Fun fact, if I wasn't an engineer, I'd probably be doing real estate full time because I love getting my hands dirty, fixing up houses, that sort of stuff. So Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit more about Delta's history?
So like Derek said, Delta is a large company and we are an old company. So just a little fun fact, Delta started in May 30th of 1924 in Macon, Georgia, and now we are located in Atlanta, Georgia. So since we are such an old company, then we also have some pretty old legacy tech systems and technology. One thing that we have internally is IBM Rational ClearCase. So Delta has been using ClearCase for 20 plus years or so, and it's a great tool, and it has served its purpose very well in the past. But as far as the industry goes, no one really knows what ClearCase is coming out of college, and it's just an old tool. So that brings up some change. We also have a tool that's totally internal. It's called the RET Depot, the Release Engineering Team Depot. And basically, it's just our homegrown binary repository. And again, this is something the industry doesn't even know. So it's not even known outside of Delta. It's a great tool again. It's been around for 20 years or so, and it's a binary repository. It was built before Sonatype, and it served its purpose very well. However, as the industry's been changing, then we have different challenges we have to face, and we want to keep up with the industry standard knowledge. So this kind of brings up a frowny face in a lot of people's eyes because, oh, we're working with ClearCase. We have this RET Depot. What are those? Don't really know. So that really led to our transformation here at Delta Airlines. So Jasmine, why don't you talk a little bit more about our transformation here at Delta?
Absolutely. So this is really important to Delta and our IT organization. And it started with a new CIO, Rahul Samant, who joined us a couple of years ago. And he focused on a lot of different things in IT. One of those things that he decided to focus on was our speed to market and delivering business value faster to internal customers and in turn to our external customers like you, Derek, hopefully your customer. This allowed us to get the message out that this was coming from the top levels, right? The CIO is saying that we need to get this software out there faster. So obviously that gives everyone a big push to, get onto these new things and start accepting these new ideals. One of the ways that we did that is by modernizing our tools. As Chris mentioned, we previously used ClearCase, RET, an internal homegrown tool, and a lot of this stuff no one knew about, right? So we couldn't attract the top talent out there to help us with this transformation because no one really knew exactly what ClearCase or RET was. So by modernizing our tools, it helped us get those individuals out there who were at the top of the game and could help us with that transformation. The next thing that we did was centralize our technologies. So we decided to take, a central approach to all of the tool chains. And this was because there were tons of pockets of tools out there in Delta. We had individual teams using pretty much every tool you can name out there, just trying to survive, right? Just trying to get their specific software out there faster within their specific environment. With this, right, you had different teams doing different things in different ways. But by centralizing that, we have one seamless approach, right? Everyone uses these same tools and everything is standard. It allowed us to centralize supporting these teams and also making sure that everyone solves the problems in the same ways. This also allowed us to bring teams along that were not quite as mature as those teams who had already adopted these products. So they also got the benefits of us introducing these tools. Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit more about how we modernize our applications here during the transformation?
Sure. So naturally, the transformation brought about a modernization of our applications. Since we were working in the ClearCase space with WebSphere applications and some older technologies, and that brought about modernizing our applications from the OS type to the types of technologies we're working with, whether that's building the application or deploying the application. So this obviously just brought about that transformation. And there's a lot of different types of tools we brought in. Obviously, Sonatype is one of them. But I'm going to go ahead and let Jasmine talk about the different tools that we've brought into the organization here.
Absolutely. So let's start off with Sonatype, right? Why not? So Sonatype has fulfilled that need for a place to store the enterprise artifacts, right? So before we were using the homegrown tool that was with flat file, and teams pretty much just went there to store everything and deployed from there as well. So Sonatype has filled that void. GitLab, we also adopted because of its distributed nature. It made it easier for teams to collaborate and to move quicker when integrating code. So that was a great add. Next, we also chose Jenkins. Jenkins is the most widely used and most widely integrated orchestration tool out there. And with it being so open and so recognized, it was natural for us to adopt that. And it has an extensive amount of capabilities out there whereas integration with all the other tools, and everyone knows it. Coming out of school, I knew what Jenkins was, and it's very modern. Lastly, we're adopting SonarQube just so that we can put a magnifying glass on better code quality and making sure that our code is where it needs to be, so that way we can be more confident when we're releasing new artifacts. Chris is going to talk a little bit more about what we wish we knew when implementing Sonatype Nexus.
Yeah, so this is really key, especially if you're looking to bring Sonatype Nexus into your organization, or if you already have, maybe there's a few things that we can help with point out earlier on rather than later. So one thing is automate everything. Yes, we can, but really not so fast. So we hit a few roadblockers along the way, and one of those was, well, we didn't have all the necessary Groovy scripts to automate the installation and configuration process. So I just want to point out that after this presentation, please reach out to Jasmine or myself in Slack. We found some scripts on GitHub that Sonatype gave us, directed us towards. So they have all the Groovy files that allow you to create blob stores and create the repositories automatically. So we wanted to automate not only the installation of the product, but also the configuration. And really what that helps is it helps us not have snowflakes between our non-production system and our production system. So yes, we definitely say get ahead of your automation very early on, and make sure that you have all the necessary Groovy scripts. Something else to keep in mind early on is your retention, and to make sure that you set up the retention policies very early on. So here at Delta, we have noticed an increase in our data tremendously in the past couple of months. And really that started us running around and being like, hey, we need more disk space. We need to get rid of some snapshots. And what about all these releases? Do we really need all of these? So set up your retention policy early. So here at Delta, we started out keeping snapshots for 30 days that had been unused. And we have moved that down to 7 days. So basically just 1 week. So our app teams have not complained about that. Typically what we have found here at Delta is that once a snapshot has been created and published to Sonatype Nexus, after about a week, the engineer really doesn't need that snapshot anymore. Either that has been created as a release candidate, or it's really just not needed anymore. So we definitely would say go ahead and set up those early on so you don't have trouble later down the road. So Jasmine, why don't you talk about some of the things that we are glad that we implemented?
Yeah, so first and foremost, we are very excited that we separated our blob storage per repository type. And this is for a couple of reasons. First, it gave us the ability to view specific consumption of disk space. And secondly, it provided the dynamic capabilities for storage. So although we don't utilize it now, but should we need to in the future, we have the ability to add more storage to the specific blob store versus adding it to the entire disk when maybe not really it's needed there, right? So Chris, tell us a little bit more about our automated installation and why are we glad we did that?
Yeah, so going off of the previous slide, there's obviously some negatives to our automation process, but there's some great positives that have come out of this. So not only can we take our installation and we can upgrade it. So we can, yes, we can upgrade it in non-production and then upgrade it in production and be confident with that. But we can also take our Nexus installation and we can install Nexus on another server with all the same configuration. So you don't have snowflakes between different instances throughout the environment. So that's just one big plus that you'll see, especially between non-production as you're testing things out and then production, is just really enforcing that automation and making sure everything is in your source control repository so that it's always applied. So yeah, Jasmine, why don't you tell us about some of our Sonatype's guidance?
Yeah, so a lot of these, disclaimer is the two previous things we're glad about, Sonatype actually recommended to us. And so that's why our third one has to recognize them, right? They really guided us during our initial engagement. So big shout out to Andrew and Fernando. They really put us on the right path and made sure that we had the appropriate policies in place when it comes to permissions and namespaces. Without them, I don't know that we could have done it as effectively. So thanks, guys. Now, to talk a little bit about onboarding our teams and how we did that here. First, you know, when you're bringing out new products and introducing new ideals, sometimes it's not a great idea to roll it out to the entire organization initially, but perhaps do it in a more controlled manner. So that's what we decided to do. We decided to take the pilot kind of route. We had smaller teams, some of which who had already been using Nexus open source product on board to our enterprise version of Nexus initially. This allowed us to, one, learn from them since they had been using it at an enterprise level. We got to learn what type of things they needed. And two, it allowed us to fail in a controlled manner. So we got to try things out, figure out what type of things were easy, and then prove those out for scale. Chris is going to talk a little bit more about how we define those patterns.
Right. So it's very easy to see throughout the enterprise that we had a lot of applications using Ant and storing their source control in ClearCase. And so we had the migration from ClearCase to GitLab, but we also had the migration from Ant to Maven or Gradle. And when we started migrating all these apps to Maven or Gradle, that's where we started using Sonatype Nexus for our repository to download all of our dependencies, and all of our engineers started seeing the benefits of that instead of storing all of their dependencies inside of ClearCase or inside of the Ret Depot, and started separating those out. And so that was a huge success for all of our engineers. They were really super hyped about that because they were like, man, we're still using Ant, and there's a lot of other new stuff out here. So internally, we had a lot of positive feedback from engineers that they really wanted to start using the tools like Maven and Gradle. So where are we today? So just to kind of talk about that. So today we have 23 applications using Nexus, and we have 447 user count or connection counts. We have about 600 gigabytes of data stored. We have 2 data centers, and we have Nexus installed on 1 VM in each data center, and we'll talk a little bit more about our future state in just a few minutes. But that's kind of where we're at today. Jasmine, do you have anything else you'd like to add to that?
No, we just are currently still onboarding teams and rolling this out to the enterprise. We have a lot of different efforts that are happening when it comes to app modernization and just getting teams onto the new tool chain. So that's why you see that large jump right there in March of this year, right? Now that we have the full pipeline out there, teams are excited and they're ready to use these new tools, and we're happy that we can offer it to them.
One thing that we saw early on in the number, so we have 23 application teams currently using our enterprise Nexus. One thing that we saw early on is that people throughout the enterprise actually had their own Nexus stood up within their team. So we had to end up migrating them from their own Nexus to the enterprise Nexus. And so you may actually have that inside of your own organization. And so that's another reason why you want to set up some of those retention policies and automation early on.
Yeah.
And So what kind of repositories did we start out with? So currently we are using Maven, which is our most popular, NPM, and then Docker. So Docker we are not really using for the developers. That's more for the enterprise Docker images. So our engineers are not creating Docker images and then actually pushing them up to Nexus. We're just using Docker for enterprise images that we basically can control that. So we also have NuGet. And so one key thing that we've actually found out about this repository type is that we have several .NET applications throughout the enterprise. And some of those actually don't produce a NuGet package. So you can't actually put the .NET package into the NuGet repository. And we've actually placed those into the Maven repository. So Jasmine, why don't you talk a little bit about why we started using raw repository?
Yeah, so the raw repository was recently introduced by Sonatype. Can't remember exactly when, but we've utilized it for primarily executables that we're delivering to workstations for Delta employees. And we're really finding, really good use cases for the raw repository. It makes it great to have a central location where we can store those items for teams that, aren't using Maven or NPM or Docker. So really great repository to have. Chris, talk a little bit more about where we are today regarding our pipeline specifically.
Sure. So here at Delta, we have been creating a standard pipeline for our applications. And Jasmine has already talked about some of the pieces to the pipeline. Obviously, GitLab and SonarQube, and Jenkins is the orchestrator. And at the end of this, you see we have Nexus as our binary repository. So Nexus is one piece to our puzzle that fits in nicely to our pipeline. So we have created the pipeline to be a more standard process through Delta. So you can take an application and you know exactly, you're going to use Maven, you're going to use Gradle, and then these are the steps that you have to take in order to get your application to production. So Jasmine, you have some more to add about this?
Yeah, so just to be clear, SpongeBob is not a part of the pipeline, but I wanted to add something to just show how happy individuals were when we presented the full pipeline solution for them. I'm just about as happy as SpongeBob when he gets a Krabby Patty. But we rolled out these things individually, right? So we had pockets of GitLab, people were using Nexus, but we didn't really have the full thing. So now that we have that full solution, everybody's really excited to come on board onto the pipeline.
Thanks, Jasmine. So the future state of where Delta is going to be going with Sonatype Nexus. So actually in the coming month, we're going to be implementing the high availability of Sonatype Nexus. So like I stated earlier, we have Nexus on one VM in 2 different data centers, and only one of those data centers is actually active. So we're going to be moving to a high availability state. Since we've had a tremendous growth throughout the enterprise and it's going to be increasing a lot, we want to make sure that we have a stable binary repository for our users. So we're going to be setting up Nexus on 3 VMs backed by NFS and SAN storage. And all of that's going to be done with our automation. So it's great that we can just take our automation and we can apply Nexus to those VMs. It makes our work a whole lot easier. Also, we're going to be looking into the artifact labeling and staging. So one key thing that our users have been asking for is, hey, how do I know that my release is actually, it's in prod or it's in INT from a Nexus perspective? So this way, when an application release makes it to production, we can come back and we can label it in Nexus and say, hey, this artifact is in production. And really that helps a few things. It helps us from an auditing standpoint. We know what artifacts have made it to production and what artifacts need to be audited and kept around. And then we can say, hey, all these artifacts, they never actually made it to production. So we can go ahead and delete some things after a certain period of time. So that really helps from us cleaning up stuff. So Jasmine, why don't you tell us a little more about our repositories and optimization in the future?
Yeah, so Sonatype introduces, they have tons of repository types out there out of the box that we get when you install Sonatype Nexus. So one of them that we are looking to leverage is the Yum repository, Yum hosted specifically. We have a lot of infrastructure teams that are utilizing the Yum central repository, and we would like to place some of the internal Delta packages in a place where everybody can access them, right? So it's not just a package on one server that gets SCP to another server so you can use it there. You just come to one Yum repository and get everything you need. So the next thing that we want to focus on is optimization. And this is the best word I could come up with to describe us, just staying on the bleeding edge of the new things that Sonatype introduces and trying to make sure that we keep it available for our customers. So this means, making sure we're purging artifacts frequently, making sure that our response time is good, and making sure that we're staying on top of, any issues that our users see.
So we just want to say thank you to Sonatype. We just want to say thank you to all the Delta people that were not in this presentation: Keenan, Artur, Aran, Varun, and Louis. Special thanks to Fernando as well from Sonatype. He meets with us weekly, and we talk about what our needs are and where we're going in the future. So we just want to thank you all, and we hope this presentation has been beneficial to you. We would definitely like to answer any questions if we have time now. We will also be in the Slack channel after this to answer any questions about our implementation or the journey that Delta has taken with Nexus. So thank you so much. Derek?
Awesome. Thank you. That was great. The number of things that you guys covered, just in terms of one, I'll point out the collaboration between you two and the back and forth was awesome. Usually we have one speaker first and then the next speaker. So the trade-off and interactivity was great. Also, I really like what you said about modernizing your IT infrastructure and the new CIO coming in and saying, if we're going to hire people, then we need to, make sure we have modern tools, because people are getting out of school and they're used to, Jenkins and GitLab and Maven and Nexus, and we need to have what people are trained for. And even the interesting point that you made, that when you went out to the business units, some of the Nexus instances already existed out there before you even got there. And I'm sure that was true with other tools in your infrastructure as well, as the developers knew they needed to use them, but it wasn't centralized yet in your tool stack. So, but I think, that strategy is, was clearly came through in your presentation, that you're trying to better standardize on those and optimize the development experience. And I also think, just as I've seen in your presentation and others, the kind of patterns of what people have adopted, we continue to see, Nexus, Jenkins, GitLab, SonarQube, Jira, Maven show up in all of these presentations over and over again. So there's, clearly a community out there of users like yourselves and other organizations that are using common tool sets, and there are lessons learned that we can share between all the organizations. So really happy to see that, and sharing kind of your lessons learned and what's working, what's not working, where to rely on Sonatype. One question I'll ask you just before we go into Slack. So you mentioned you Fernando and Andrew are helping you out on a regular basis. How much are they helping you out? Is this a couple minutes a week, or is this more intensive in terms of the time investment? How much are you kind of self-supportive versus needing support from Sonatype?
Yeah, so we've been able to, we basically meet with Fernando once a week. And if there's something that we need help with from, hey, how does this product work? And what is the best practice for high availability? We'll talk to Fernando about that, and we'll come up with a good solution. So from the aspect of the product is great on the side of, there's a lot of things in the product that help you keep up with cleaning out the data that is no longer needed. And if you need to check the logs, or if you need to set up some types of what am I looking for?
Or...
Yeah, new repositories, or if you have SSGM groups you need to add in there, and you need to add in more people. It's really just a self-service way from the admin's perspective. So there's not a lot there that we have to go and say, hey, we need help with this.
Yeah, and the support is great. I frequently interact when I face issues, whether it be with LDAP certificates or just random stuff. I'll shoot out an email to support at Sonatype, and usually it's Rich that responds. So I'm like, does he sleep?
No, he doesn't.
No, he doesn't. Okay, confirmed, right?
It's a trade secret.
Yeah, but he's super responsive, and we always get the help that we need. And Fernando's great about checking on our tickets and making sure that we're where we need to go and have what we need to do to succeed. So
I've also been able to reach out to like Jeffrey Hesse as well. On GitHub, there's a lot of tools like Slack to help talk about implementation and if you have a question and things like that, especially around like automation process. There's a lot of great resources out there and people that are doing the automation as well that can help out, that are really great.
Yeah, we've for those that are on Twitter, a good way to, or an easy way to get to Jeffrey is he's managing the @Sonatype Dev Twitter handle. So even if questions come into the @Sonatype Twitter handle, if they're more technical in nature, then we loop in @Sonatype Dev. People like Jeffrey and others are monitoring that channel pretty regularly. So if you want to get a hold of us, there are a lot of ways to do it, of which we've covered some in earlier presentations. But yeah, there's a team of us, and Rich doesn't sleep. He's gonna kill me for saying that if he's watching now. Probably getting into Slack now, saying, "What are you saying about me?" So, okay, so Jasmine, Chris, thank you very much. Jasmine, I want to figure out how I can get a bio picture standing in front of a jet engine.
Come on down to Atlanta. I'll take you on the tour. We'll take a picture for you.
Excellent. That is probably the coolest speaker picture I've seen in a while. So, all right. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you in Slack.
All right.
Thank you.
Talk about what Genome.One is doing in general, and also slightly a bit about the technical aspects of how we go about realizing or implementing our products. So I'm going to start very slowly and introduce the background and domain in which Genome.One is being active. And I'm going to start with basically the fact that in the same way in which we're coding applications that end up on the web or our mobile devices, there is this thing called our genetic code that creates a human app, right? So everything we have and everything that defines us, in particular from a physical, but also I guess also from a psychological perspective, lies in the code that is being written in our genes. And you can see here, the pairs of the chromosomes that we have, and the way in which the chromosomes, alignment of the chromosomes, and how the genes are being defined when we're born, affects the way we're looking, for example, and also to a large extent the way we're behaving. I guess more importantly, the genome and the DNA affects our health, and we take this very seriously. Obviously, there is the there's an aspect related to the inheritance and the way in which DNA is passed on from and our genes are passed on from generation to generation. It has a tremendous impact on how we age and how our health evolves in time, and also lately and as it has been discovered, it influences a lot, for example, the way we're reacting to various viruses, bacteria, as well as to the various medication that is being used in current practice. Now, this is particularly important because we're getting to the point where genomes, and by genomes, just to make it clear, I refer to, I guess, that product of our DNA being sort of decoded in that long sort of string of 4 letters. So genomes are really coming to age, and they're becoming slowly a commodity. And here you can see the amount of funds that have been invested in the last about 5 years. So we're really talking about, I guess, the last 5 years in genome sequencing and genome related technology. And you can see that obviously the US is out there with over, and the US and Canada is out there with over $10 billion. Europe, is in the 600 million euros, and then the UK with the 100,000 Genomes project in the 310 million pounds. And in Australia and in general, the APAC region is trying to follow as well. In Australia, we had several programs, both at the federal level as well as at the local state level, where there were several rounds of about $25 million put into basically using genomic technology and genomes in general and bringing them into clinical care and trying to understand how they can both assist with diagnosis of diseases, but also getting closer and closer to using them for prevention and for health management. Now, one interesting aspect with respect to the genomes, and this is, I guess, where it really this is why we're saying that they are actually coming and they're more or less there, is this evolution of the cost of sequencing the genome. And you can see here that it kind of dropped fairly abruptly, I would say, from about $100 million, that was more or less the cost of the first genome being sequenced, or the whole genome being sequenced in 2001, to today at about $850. So there's really a dramatic decrease in the cost of the genome, and as I said, it kind of at this point it kind of becomes more of a commodity, and the shift has we're assisting, basically we're witnessing a shift from understanding how the sequencing process works into really optimizing, for example, the alignment to a reference genome, parallelizing the process, making it faster, cheaper, but also really shifting towards understanding what is really in the genome that we can use for health management and prevention. So what exactly does Genome.One do? We're really trying to combine whole genome, so basically understanding the decoding of the DNA and using the entire genome together with the clinical characteristic to get to an interpretation of the genome in context, again, because the clinical characteristics would be particular to a specific patient or to a specific individual, and interpreting those characteristics interpreting the genome in the context of those clinical characteristics to get to a genetic answer, and at that point, that genetic answer could help either to diagnose a patient or to really look into the predisposition of a certain individual to a certain disorder, to understand exactly how in general the health management or how the health in general can be used, so it can be managed by means of the underlying or underpinning genomic information. Now, the genome again has a tremendous impact over the entire span of healthcare. And you can see here that in reality, it really goes from the very beginning, as in before we were born, in the carrier screening phase, where couples that want to conceive, they would in principle, or they could in principle, have a genetic test, especially if there are certain concerns with respect to certain diseases that have been diagnosed in the family. So it's really before we're born at the very end, when we die, and again the genome can be used for understanding, for example, the death cases. Now, as you can see here, this is really quite a varied set of tasks that have or can use genome for interpretation and for basically for decision making. Now, in Genome.One in particular has been active so far in the rare disorders, rare disease diagnosis space. We were the first Australian company to be accredited for clinical diagnosis using whole genome sequencing, and that was again in the rare disease space. But we're now going more towards not diagnosis, but towards really prevention and understanding. For example, how can we use the genome to dose, or or how can we use the genome, for example, to understand what is the effect of a certain medication, or over a patient, or to what extent that particular patient or individual may have side effects, obviously unwanted side effects from a certain medication. So it's really about getting towards prevention and health management. So we were also among, I guess, the first companies that put out there, again, in this precision healthcare space, a product that takes the genome, again, the 6 billionth of characters of the DNA that is sequenced, and really churns it through a bioinformatics pipeline, and then from a genomic interpretation process, and trying to look at things like, for example, cancer predisposition. And you can see here the number of genes that we're looking at, other genes that are related to cardiovascular conditions, but also to medications, and understanding, to what extent, or what is the relationship between certain mutations that you may have in your genome and medication that you may be prescribed. Now, genetic testing in general in healthcare, and I guess what I'm trying to do now is going back to the idea of we have the whole genome, but what we're really trying to do is really making it available as part of the clinical care, because to a large extent so far, especially when it comes to whole genome rather than just genetic testing, which could take various other kind of forms, a lot simpler than doing sequencing of the entire genome. Genetic testing using whole genome sequencing is really cumbersome. So you can see here in the entire path, it goes from a referral to a consultation with a specialist. There's obviously counseling is a very important aspect, because it's really about understanding not only the intended outcome of the report that would be produced at the end of the genome interpretation, but also the impact that information has on the entire family, right? So keeping in mind that we're not talking only about you as an individual, but we're also talking about perhaps things that may affect your children later on, or things that you may understand why they appear in your case based on your family history. So counseling is a very important step in this process. And then it goes to specimen collection, which then is blood is then transformed into DNA. DNA is being sequenced, and there's a fairly large analytical task there, that the bioinformatics aspect that transforms the genome, which is in the order of hundreds of gigs of data, into a form that is ready for analysis and for interpretation by clinicians. which is basically the interpretation and reporting step, and then going back to the consultation with the specialist. Again, counseling. Once we know the result, obviously it's very, very important to understand what exactly does that result mean in general for the individual, also from a family perspective, and then back to the specialist and some clinical action. So you can see there's quite a number of steps, and in general, this particular workflow takes about, in the best case scenario, takes about 12 weeks. So what we're trying to do is really making sure that the genomes really are part of our health record, and they're there to assist and get us to a clinical action in basically in no time rather than in 12 weeks. So the way we're trying to get to this point is basically to do genome basically sequencing once, and then do in the reinterpretation or querying of the genome in context, given a certain event, which obviously event is related to symptoms that you may exhibit several times, right? So basically, from what we're trying to do is break this long 12 to 18 weeks workflow into two steps. One, the actual sequencing aspect, which is just about the counseling, again, because again, it's very, very important to understand the information that will come out of the interpretation later on, the specimen collection and stuff, having a genome record, which genome record to be part of your general health record. And then when it comes to certain events or episodes in your health life, it's really just about point of care interpretation and reporting. So rather than going through this long workflow where interpretation happens only once and then there's only a single clinical action at the end of the workflow, what we're talking about is really routine decision making at the point of care using the genome record. So you can see here there's these 4 steps where you would go back to the specialist or to a GP. There will be a point of care interpretation, again, because the genome is already there. It's part of your record together with your with the context provided by that particular episode, and immediately to clinical action and post counseling, and this happening on a sort of routine basis. Now, this is in principle to a large extent what we're aiming to do, and we're very close. We're very close, in particular in Australia, to having this workflow implemented as part of point of care, and what we're trying to basically coin as the point of care genomics. So I think what's worth at this point to go into the technical aspects to see exactly how we're implementing this. And it's worth mentioning that I'm going to focus on the application side of things. As you can see here, there are various steps that have, I guess, other technical tasks involved. And in particular, I guess that the one that is really important is resource intensive is the bioinformatics analysis. So I'm not going to focus on that. I'm going to focus on the idea that you have the genome and you have the symptomatology or the episode, and we're building applications. And in terms of applications, going beyond this point of care implementation. We're also working with various stakeholders on, for example, enabling patients and engaging patients into augmenting their health profile. Again, keeping in mind that if it's not already there, the genome will be there eventually part of the health record, and an incremental or longitudinal augmentation of the phenotype, in general, of the phenotype, what we call a phenotype profile, or of the symptomatology of the individual will be beneficial over the long term, because it will really help to understand to what extent the individual is predisposed to a certain disorder, or how certain things can be treated or managed in time. So I'm going to go deep dive into our technical stack. But before doing that, before going to the technical step, one aspect that is particularly or is particular to our domain, I guess it's really what really makes this domain really exciting and fascinating is the fact that at this point in time, and in general with the evolution of science, we have a certain sort of view over what genome can do for health management or for diagnosis. So here you can see an example of an episode where a particular individual consults as being consulted by a doctor. We can see the symptomatology of the patient, and then using the entire information that we have around the patient, things like, for example, the family history, the genome, but also, and I guess this is a really important aspect, the relationship between the various aspects around the patient, and having them tapped into the existing body of knowledge around the genome and around the symptomatology, which at the end of the day, it turns out to be basically just a large graph. You can end up with the diagnosis. And again, going back to what really makes this field particularly fascinating is that 1 year later, because science evolves and more things are discovered about the genome, or we gain a better and a more deeper understanding of what the genome does, you can immediately action against previous episodes, and you can see here if for example in 2017 we had that particular diagnosis for this patient, in 2018, because our knowledge has evolved around the genome, and because science and medical care has evolved, we can immediately infer if there is for example, a drug that is available for diagnosis, and automatically, without the need for reconsultation, we can propose, or we can trigger an alert or an event that would go back to the clinician and to the patient, and would lead immediately to clinical action. So again, it's not, I guess, we're looking into a non-static view over the health data or health information around the patient. We're really looking at the health data from a genomic perspective, where the knowledge around the genome evolves, and we always have to be tapped into the existing body of knowledge to be able to drive clinical decision making. So now going back to how we're implementing, or how we're actually making things work, I'm going to talk about the technical stack. So we are, to a large extent, a Java house, if I may say so. So you can see here our technical stack. We basically we're using a microservice-oriented architecture, built on top of Java and Spring 2.0, and using MongoDB as a database engine, and on the front end, predominantly React and Redux. Now, in terms of architecture, as I mentioned, where we have adopted the microservice-oriented architecture, because it really allows us to create that, the business sort of context for each of the pieces of code that we have to produce, and it really allows us to impose an individual life cycle for each of the microservices, and at the application level, it allows us to have an expanded portfolio of applications that are really domain oriented, such as, for example, the patient engagement platform, or a clinician-facing decision-making platform, whether Web1 or one that is being integrated directly into the point of care. So basically, this is basically the architecture. using the standards for microservices with the gateways to be able to do a proper separation of concerns, and then applications that are domain oriented at the top. And on the left side, you can see that we're using Kafka for messaging purposes. Now, in terms of deployment, the architecture is being deployed in a Kubernetes cluster. Because really it allows us to auto scale and to we can immediately tap into the properties of a Q cluster, such as self healing or the fault tolerance, and in addition to this, we at least at this point we're using the standard Elk stack for monitoring logs. Now, just a bit about security. Obviously, we're taking the security and data privacy very, very seriously, and I guess beyond the standard and expected communication over HTTPS, we've introduced access control authentication at every single layer of communication within the platform. So obviously you have the the security provided by the within the Docker containers, but then the communication, for example, between several containers or between several microservices done via an authentication layer and via access control, and we have very clearly defined rules with respect to what microservice, for example, can access the endpoints or the API provided by another microservice, and in this way, really trying to minimize the risk of external factors being able to tamper with the data that is being managed by a particular microservice. Now, in terms of the build process, I guess this is where we're getting back to the point mentioned by Mark. So we're using the standard Keyflow development approach and GitHub and ZenHub to manage our agile development process. Now, once we have, I guess, a particular change and within the code base, the build plans are being then managed and using Atlassian, and this is, I guess, where Nexus and Nexus IQ have become really critical as part of our build process, both for managing the artifacts that are the outcomes basically of the build process, but in particular really to manage our the dependencies, the vulnerabilities around dependencies and the license check. I'll go back into this in a second, but just to go back to the general build process, code based is being built using Bamboo, is obviously being checked for vulnerabilities using Nexus IQ as part of the build plan. Then we're going through an application security testing, the testing phase, and finally, once the new build is there, the build is Dockerized again using Bamboo, and then is being automatically deployed, depending on the context. Either in AWS or in GCP. I'm saying depending on the context because we're running several environments, both production as well as development environments in both in AWS as well as in GCP. And I guess this pipeline really enables us to be fairly independent and fairly transparent with respect to the deployment process, and it doesn't necessarily affect us or it doesn't necessarily have an impact the fact that we're using multiple cloud providers. So going back to the role that the Sonatype products have in our build plan, we really see them as being critical components within this process. In particular, when it comes to the vulnerability verification and the update management of each of the components, and and we've talked with Mark about this, how important and how how easy this process has become now that we're using Nexus IQ versus how we used to do things before we've engaged Sonatype, and how to a large extent we were blinded to the vulnerabilities that the dependencies that we have, and how we were not really able to manage them appropriately. Having Nexus IQ as part of the process really lifts a lot of the weight off our shoulders, and it is practically embedded within the build plan, and enables us without any effort to keep track and to be always up to date with critical updates to our dependencies, but also to basically immediately take action and to change or to do an update if necessary, both if a vulnerability is being detected, or if one of the dependencies that we have has a license change. That being obviously also particularly important from both business as well as legal perspective. Now, in addition to IQ, which again has made a tremendous impact in our development process, and we're also using a Nexus as an artifact repository for basically all the builds that are or basically the artifacts that are being produced by our products. So that's in principle what I really try to do is really take you through again the context, which is getting to use the information that we have in the genome as part of the clinical care, and using it contextualized and in a routine manner, rather than the way it has been used so far within that 12 to 18 weeks workflow. And how important this will become in the future to drive decision making around our health. I've mentioned the applications that we're building using the genome and the symptomatology of the patient, both in terms of engaging patients to augment their health profile, and then to help later on with their health management, as well as the clinical facing aspects that enable the clinicians to take decisions and actions immediately on the combined genomic information as well as the episodic information. I've talked briefly about our technical stack and the microservices oriented architecture, and finally here in the build process, which is to a large extent fairly standard these days. I've really emphasized the role that in particular Nexus IQ has in our process with respect to making sure that we are covered for both vulnerabilities, for the dependencies that we're using, as well as in terms of the legal aspects of the licenses associated with these dependencies. And with this, I would like to thank you, and hand over back to you, Mark.
Thank you, Tudor. Very informative. I've always been fascinated by the work that your team is doing.
Okay, we are back live. We had Tudor Genome.One. They, as you saw, they're based in Australia, so couldn't be live with us. So that was a recorded session that we did earlier. So we are just on time for our last session of the day. It's hard to believe it's 5:15 because we started at 8:45 this morning, and the day has just flown by with some great content. We have Xin Zhu along with us here. Sorry, I'll get on screen. So Xin Zhu from Kaiser Permanente will I see you on the channel, so we'll just unmute you if you're able to unmute yourself, and we can get you online here. So fascinating story coming up. Zen, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. So Zen, do you want to, we'll focus on you. If you want to try and share your screen, we can make sure that that is working as well now that we have the audio. And so Zinzu, we haven't worked together before directly. I know you're working with the rest of our team at Sonatype. So again, this is one of the joys of today and the presentations that I get to hear from people that have not, that I haven't heard from before, that I get a new story. And yours is of particular interest. So when you look at a large-scale healthcare insurance provider and Kaiser, and being able to scale to hundreds of thousands of users that are supporting the applications that you are building within your enterprises, one of the things that the description of your session says, and we have said a lot at Sonatype, is 90% of the applications out there, within environments or of the applications that are out there in the environments, that 90% of these are built from open source components. So you have a lot of open source components that are flowing through your development tool chains. And as we all know, some of those have known vulnerabilities, license risk, outdated versions, etc. And you've worked with our team at Sonatype to find new ways to automatically govern the use of those components in your development lifecycle. So I can see that you're sharing your screen now. If you want to bring your slides up, we can switch over to that view. And I can see your full slide deck now. So Zen, if you would kick us off for our final session of the day before Mark and I wrap up at the end. But I'm really looking forward to hearing what you've been doing at Kaiser and how others could learn from you as well.
All right. Well, thank you for the kind introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Xin Shu. I'm from the Kaiser IT's security team. Apparently today's last presentation is talking about how we use the Nexus IQ and component firewall capabilities that's outside of your typical DevOps pipeline, beyond that, and really at the very early stage of the life cycle. But before I get into that presentation, just a few words about Kaiser Permanente. Some of you may not be very familiar with it. Kaiser Permanente obviously is a healthcare organization. Currently, we have about 12.2 million people that gets care and coverage from Kaiser Permanente. We have a little bit over 200,000 employees. We have 22,000 physicians, 58,000 nurses. Kaiser Permanente has been consistently ranked as one of the top healthcare providers for many years. In 2017, Kaiser Foundation Health Plan and Kaiser Foundation Hospital, this combined operating revenue was $72.7 billion. So as you can tell, Kaiser is it's a really large size organization, and we have a large number of employees with very, very different diverse backgrounds. Okay. So now let's go back to the presentation. This is a simple illustration of, many of us, how we a typical use of Nexus IQ and repositories in the DevOps pipeline, right? So on the left-hand side, you have, say, a Maven-based build process, right? In building an application, Maven requests a library because the application specified that's a dependency for it. So Maven makes a request to the proxy repository of library A, and proxy repository at that point may not already have library A yet. So it turns around and asks the library A from a remote host repository. In many cases, you probably set it up such that that's Maven Central. You get the library A, and then the proxy repositories through firewall capabilities asks the Nexus IQ to really run the policy evaluations against library A. Now, if the evaluation result, everything comes back was as good, then the repository returns library A to Maven. And in that case, Maven build process moves on to the next step of the building the application. Similarly, if Maven build, let's say, requests another library B, but this time the policy evaluation in Nexus IQ indicates library B is no good. It violates one or several policies, possibly say due to security vulnerabilities or licensing terms, and if you configure your Nexus IQ policies to fail in such conditions, your proxy repository will then not serve the library B. Instead, it will tell Maven basically that the component it requested has been quarantined, for example. And in that case, your Maven build will fail. All that is really great. Within Kaiser Permanente, we have been making extensive use. We have obviously, as such a huge organization, we have very large number of applications being deployed, being developed, being tested at any given time. We make extensive uses of Nexus IQ through the DevOps pipeline to analyze all the open source components being used by a particular application, and depending on the outcome of that analysis, we notify the development teams about vulnerable components and work with them to remediate those kind of issues. This is all great, and like I said, we make extensive use of that capability, but we also found out that in many cases, if that's the only thing you do, you have this problem in the sense that, hey, I wrote my code, and then now we run through this, and security team tells me you have some problems because certain open source component you're using is vulnerable, but I'm not going to be able to really fix it anytime soon now because I already wrote most of my code, or I already finished writing my code. We're going to have to find a time and possibly funding and budget for the next release or sometime down the road to be able to address the possible security problems, for example. Right. We also have, like I said, large number of employees coming from very diverse background. Some of them, and actually most of them, don't have any programming expertise, right? They are not going to be able to know what is a DevOps pipeline. They don't know how to even log into Nexus IQ and search the applications and look for the vulnerabilities. But some of our employees do have that need to be able to make really use of that capability that's in Nexus IQ, right? Obviously, open source component vulnerabilities, licensing terms, but they're not that technical in the sense of they're not programmers. And asking them to use Nexus IQ as is or through the pipelines to be able to leverage that kind of data and capability in Nexus IQ is really, really challenging. So those were some of the drivers that led us to develop this simple little tool that's inspired by this general process. And here is the very simple little tool that we developed. Before I get further deep, let me just also explain a few things. Kaiser, as company policies, we are very, very careful to not give the appearance that we're endorsing any specific commercial products. So you probably have, some of you may have noticed, right? On the slides, I do not have any word about any particular products written down. This is part of the company policy that we do not want it to even give the appearance of endorsing any specific product. And also because of that kind of reason, I'm not allowed to give you any live demo. So what I did is I did some screen capture and put it on the slides. And before I was able to make this presentation, I had to have the slides submitted for internal review. And as part of that internal review, I had to actually specially produce a version of the tool that's heavily stripped down version, so it doesn't have anything that might, again, give the appearance that we are endorsing some products in some public forum. So what you're seeing is we do have the actual tool in production, but what you are seeing here in the slides are a specially built, stripped down version of the tool. Okay. So like I said, it's a very simple tool. For us, the main driver was that we want people to be able to leverage what's the capabilities and the very useful data that's in Nexus IQ, but without having to really have much training, because most of our employees absolutely have no programming background, right? And yet some of them do actually need to be able to benefit from the capability of Nexus IQ. So what inspired us is that, well, everybody at least knows how to use a computer and knows how to do kind of search. So we said, let's create a sort of a search-based a tool that leverages some of that capability and exposes some of the capability of Nexus IQ. So, you know, a user comes to this tool, the first page is just this search field. This is, in this case, I'm showing the Maven format kind of component search. So you give them you enter the group ID, artifact ID, and version, and you click the search button. It will take you, well, actually, let me go back to this slide. So at that point, when you hit the search button, that that information, the component information, is sent to that web server, web application. And the application, what it does is it mimics like a Maven process in that case. So it turns around, sends a HTTP request to the proxy repository saying, hey, I need to get this particular component, and here's the information about the component. And then the proxy repository goes through the motion, gets the component, goes through the Nexus IQ evaluation of the policies on that component, and returns it back to the application. So at that point, the application knows, okay, so we found that component. We know now that component is in that repository, proxy repository. And then we tell the end user, saying, okay, so what you were looking for, we have found it, and all the details that you're looking for is available on this page. Again, this is a heavily stripped down version of the actual page. In the actual page, we have a lot of more contents that mostly are sort of documentation, educational purpose, to basically prepare any kind of user, whether they have any prior knowledge of Nexus IQ or not, to know once you get onto this page, next page, what they're going to see and how are they going to be able to properly interpret the information that's going to be presented to them, right? And once they click that link, this is the kind of page they will be taken to. And many of you probably are very familiar with this kind of UI. It's basically a report page from Nexus IQ. It's slightly different in the sense that this is a report page for a proxy repository on Nexus IQ, versus most of the time, obviously, on Nexus IQ, you probably have lots and lots of applications, and for each application, you may have many reports over the time, right? But otherwise, it's very similar to your regular application report in Nexus IQ. It shows you all the components that's in that repository, and obviously you can quickly find the specific component you are looking for by type, the partial name of the component, and then once you get there, you can click that specific component of a specific version, and then you will be presented with the familiar Nexus IQ details about that component, right? Was what are the possible security vulnerabilities, security alerts that, according to the policy, you have defined it? What are the licensing alerts? And if there are any security vulnerabilities, what's the vulnerability details, and so on and so forth, right? So that's, again, like I said, it was a very simple little tool that because of some of the real life use cases we have encountered that inspire us to create this tool. We have rolled out this tool only very recently. We think it has been really useful to not only the people that we originally thought that's going to be really interested in this, and those were the people who don't necessarily have much programming background, but it also, somewhat surprisingly, it also turned out that many of our developers also really like this tool, in the sense that many of our developers, they are obviously very busy most of the time with their deliverables and schedules and deadlines, and when they finally get to a situation where, for example, an architect or a lead developer says, hey, you know, security team, I worked with you guys last time for this previous application, and we went through the pipeline stuff, and, you know, as part of the pipeline, Nexus IQ-based scanning was integrated, and we got really useful information. Now we are about to start a new application. Our team is being given this new requirements to start developing a new application. And because of our kind of prior experience, we felt that we have some ideas that what kind of frameworks we were thinking of using. And therefore, we also have kind of a list of maybe some what kind of open source libraries we might need to use. It would be nice, actually, you know, when we are doing brainstorming, to be able to really quickly, right, like few seconds, to be able to find out, hey, that particular open source library we're thinking maybe we need to use. Is it you know, kind of good enough in the sense that we may know, yeah, it does have the kind of functionality we are looking for, but is it good from the open source licensing perspective? Is it good from security perspective? Does it have vulnerabilities? And instead of, you know, even for developers, instead of me going into my IDE, set up a dummy project, and then run through the Nexus scannings to see if the library is it good or not. You know, when I'm doing whiteboarding, it would be nice to have somebody just quickly type in the information in few seconds and get the answer on, okay, that library, it looks clean, or it looks really bad from a security perspective. Maybe we should think of looking at some alternatives, right? So it was a little bit surprising to us that a lot of the developers even liked this little tool, even though for some of them, they do have the capability of obviously access Nexus IQ through either, you know, directly going to Nexus IQ, logging in, or using their IDE plugins. We also had other kind of users, notably enterprise architecture peoples, who one of their responsibility was as a custodian to some of the enterprise standards, technologies and products sometimes. And one of their long-running headache has been they wanted to be able to quote unquote recommend and endorse certain frameworks, and along with that, they always get asked about, well, for this framework, there are those open source libraries. Are you okay? Are you approving us to use that particular version? And they always had a problem trying to maintain that kind of list. So when we talk to the enterprise architecture team about, hey, this little tool with this kind of capacity, they really love the idea. They basically say, yes, we wanted this as also now embedded into their own set of tools when it comes to what is the enterprise architecture team's recommendation when it comes to open source library, specific open source library, because there are literally hundreds of thousands of them, and there's no way for them to be able to keep up with the change every day. So they're now using this tool as part of when somebody comes to the architecture team and say, what about these set of libraries? What's your recommendation? They have in their overall recommendation, one of the things they basically tell the customer is, you should use this tool, look for what the current security status is and what the current licensing condition is, and make sure that they are appropriate for your particular application or usage of those components. So this is the last presentation of the day. So I'm basically done. If you have any questions, you can keep on.
Jen, Mark, and Derek here. Wonderful presentation. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Derek and I were just sitting here talking about how powerful the solution is that you provided to your team there as far as planning goes.
Yeah, it's fascinating to hear that, from the presentation that you gave, a lot of the presentations today that were focused on our products that use IQ Server, especially Nexus Lifecycle. The integration points we've heard are inside the IDE or inside the Jenkins or Bamboo, build servers or integration servers. And the concept that you talked about was the furthest left. Yeah. We've heard people shift. Yeah. What some people call DevSecOps, and you didn't want to label this as a DevOps practice, but it was really, how do we shift security left to the furthest point left of design, where you've built this web application to surface the information for developers, and even as you built it for security professionals to use, that the developers were saying in the whiteboard stage of design, let us use this before we've even started coding, before we're in the IDE. And I think that's something that's really exciting to hear, is how early can you take automated security, where the automation is really the lookup of the vulnerability information or license information, what have you, about that, and present it to people in that phase of the life cycle, and saving them a heck of a lot of rework down the road. No developer wants to use that bad component if they found out through your web app that it was bad. It's like, well, what alternative version can I use? And let's start with that and save us a lot of headache or back and forth with the security team, right?
It's such a simple idea, Jen, that it's brilliant in its simplicity.
Yeah, I agree. We obviously everybody talks about, we need to shift to the left, and there's no exception here at the Kaiser Permanente. The security team always talks about what are the ways to really shift left, because I don't know about the other companies out there, but in Kaiser we know once a project team started, their funding obviously has been allocated. They have a set of deliverables. They are trying to meet their schedule, their budget, and if by the time they're mostly done with their coding, and then you tell them saying, you have some problems, it usually is a pretty hot discussion at that point, saying how do we fix it? Because they may not have the time or money in that iteration to fix it anymore, right? So everybody wants to, let me know if I'm trying to use this thing and you say it's really not good. It's tremendous help to know that beforehand, before they commit, before they start spending the effort to write the code against that component.
How hard was it to build that solution? Like I said, it looks simple. I mean, you just hook up a simple web page to the back end. Is it that simple?
It's almost that simple. But since we have done this first iteration, we are thinking of one of the biggest area of improvement is that asking some of the users to say, hey, give me that group ID, artifact ID, and version is really challenging. There are like some of the users, obviously, I don't really have much clue what that is about, right? So we're going to make some significant usability improvement. Instead of asking them to provide the precise information of a component, we wanted them to be able to really just enter whatever you have heard was the name of the component. It could even be partial. Find all the possible matching, and they go through that list and say, this is the actual one. I see I may even had, misheard what the library was really about. Click that, and then we take care of the rest. We also have end users who, like I said, don't have any real programming background, but for example, some of the intellectual properties people, that they really love to be able to make use of the licensing information from Nexus IQ.
Yeah, wonderful. Beautiful idea. Congratulations.
It's a great story. It's a great wrap up to the day as well, because it's one of these kind of you save the best for last, and a simple concept that delivers a lot of value, especially for your organization and the scale of your organization too. I think the simplicity as well plays into the simplicity of the buy-in for the organization.
Right.
It's not a tough tool to use. There are 3 fields there that you need to fill out. So, right. So,
all right. Well, thank you so much. Are you going to be able to jump into the Slack channel for a couple minutes and answer some questions?
Sure. Yeah.
That'd be great. And then while you're there, please upload your slide deck. People will be looking for that.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much. Very, very, we'll be talking again, believe me.
Yeah. Yeah. That was very cool.
Thank you.
So, Mark, it is that time again. We're wrapping up the Nexus User Conference Day 1.
Day 1. Yeah.
Amazing how fast it went, because it literally feels like we were just starting a little while ago with Larry Maccheroni from Comcast early this morning. The sessions that went on today, the number of different sessions, the notes that I took throughout the day and on Slack, just to be able to go through and remember the different discussions. Some of the things that Larry pointed out about the trust algorithm and the blogging stuff that he's been doing on DevSecOpsDays.com. And the work that he's been doing, the kind of maturity model or DevSecOps scorecard that he represented. Brian Fox, the timeline that he had presented, I have to go back and look at that probably 6 times to just get the story about the cryptocurrency mining with open source components, typo squatting that's happening.
That's incredible. Yes.
And the things that are impacting the ecosystem that it was once 10 years ago very nascent, but it's grown up. There are billions upon billions of downloads from these different public repositories, but just kind of seeing how not only development has changed, but how the hacking or adversary community has changed their approach. I remember his quote of, there's nothing valuable in my application, so why do I care about hacking this? Wayne Jackson, that conversation with Matt Howard sitting right here, talking about the evolution of Sonatype and kind of where we've come over the years, and kind of the journey that we've made, the lucky opportunities that we got along the way, or the people that we met along the way that were transformative in our journey. I can go on and on with
the patterns are though that, and I'm a little jaded, but people are finding what we're providing useful, and that feels good.
Yeah.
When not just small organizations, but the big guys are saying, boy, you're helping us do this. That's something that we couldn't have done.
Yeah. And I think it's, the modernization of the workforce that Delta talked about. I think it's, when we go back to Michael Alves at Cotivity, kind of the social constructs that people are operating under, and how that relates to immutability of the infrastructure, and kind of how hard-nosed you have to be within your organization to maintain. Like
Michael's the right person to
we're trying to automate this, but how do you get people to stick to it? What's the mindset and the culture that
I'm looking at your list here? It's just, there's so much here that happened today.
Yeah. Jim Bird and his quick 5 hits,
Jim,
you know, that's a really easy session. DJ Schleen, of course, did a great job with us this afternoon. And, another cool thing, the Slack channel and all the speakers able to upload their slides throughout the day, as DJ and others had done.
I enjoyed Sarah. I mean, and she had good response in the Slack channel too.
Yeah. And people that are sharing, like, here's what we're doing. This is our pipeline. This is what it looks like. These are the challenges that we had, because it's not, we didn't want to invite people in to give we're using Sonatype technologies and we love it and everything, everything is good and everything was simple and, this is it. And it was really the conversation, as you and I had even talked about prepping for this, that, you saw, it's not just about Sonatype. It's about Sonatype and SonarQube and GitLab and Jenkins and Maven, Docker, Twistlock, and many others. And I think that kind of, that sets us up for tomorrow's conversations, where one, you're going to hear a lot from our customer success team that is coming online. They have, I think, 6 or 8 sessions. They have an entire
track to themselves.
So you get to hear from the customer success team. But tomorrow is kind of integration day at the Nexus user conference. And part of that is, as I just said, we know you're not using our product standalone. You can't use our product standalone. They have to be integrated with your DevOps or CI/CD pipeline. So we have Electric Cloud, we have GitLab, we have Terraform, Ansible, Docker, Rundeck, Twistlock, who else? Red Hat, CloudBees, Ranger 4, Signal Sciences. They're all coming tomorrow and presenting different perspectives, how they've integrated, how customers have integrated, how our partners have integrated, and talking about DevSecOps, continuous delivery, application security, and building those into the day. So we're kicking off again about 8:45, 8:50 a.m. Eastern time in the morning. The agenda is live on the site. You know how to find us. We're going to be live on Slack all day again, and looking forward to day 2.
As you're watching this, as you go back, even when you're watching the recordings, what we want you to do is think about how can you utilize what people are talking about here. It's not just sitting to listen to stories. It's like, can you put it to use? And we can put you, the people that are telling this want to tell their story. And we want you to tell your story too. So as you're listening to this, think about how you fit into the whole scheme of it.
Yep. So I think that's it. I think it's a wrap for day 1. We'll be back for day 2 for more excitement. And thank everyone for joining us today.